Can everybody hear me?
Yes, thank you.
All right. You were just flashing up about some messages about people couldn't hear, so I wasn't sure.
Oh no, it's me. I was on mute. What a day. Hi, everybody. Apologies for starting the session a bit late, and then also for being on mute. We're having some technical issues, some internet issues. It's all fun and games trying to do webinars during a global pandemic. My name is Katie Jacobs. I work with HR leaders at the CIPD and have been hosting our coronavirus webinar series. And this afternoon, we're going to be looking at how COVID-19 has changed how organisations approach reward and benefits. And joining me to discuss this and offer some advice and guidance today, we have a really great panel. We've got Charles Cotton, Senior Performance and Reward Advisor at the CIPD. We've got Sharon Riddell, Head of Reward and Executive Compensation at NatWest Group, and Laura McVicker, Legal Director at Lewis Silkin. Thank you all for joining us today. As ever, I'll just do some very quick housekeeping. I've seen some people have asked if the session's being recorded. It is. It will be available on demand via the webinar section of the CIPD website. You can also access recordings of our previous webinars there and sign up for future sessions. On Monday, we're going to be looking at return to the workplace. And on Wednesday, we have a special leadership conversation between Peter Cheese, our CAO, and Government CPO Rupert McNeil. I'll remind you about those at the end of the session. Second point, if you want to submit questions during the webinar, and we'd love to take your questions, please use the Q&A rather than the chat box. We've had a few in advance, so we'll try to answer those as well. For legal advice, a reminder that CIPD members can call our HR Inform helpline. It's available 24/7, and you get an individual response that way. And a reminder that we're updating the FAQs and resources on our website all the time as new information becomes available. Head to the CIPD Coronavirus Hub for more. And finally, I'm just going to flag our new Wellbeing Hub and Helpline for members in the UK and Ireland. Together with award-winning workplace wellbeing provider, Health Assured, we're now providing CIPD members with free help and support 24/7. And that includes online consultations or telephone consultations with qualified therapists. Members can access the phone number and the online services via the membership benefits webpage, and we'll give you some more info at the end of the session. So let's get started with the topic. Many organisations have been rethinking their pay and benefits packages during this crisis, whether that's through freezing or reducing executive or management pay and bonuses, exploring non-cash incentives, or thinking more deeply about financial well-being. But what will or indeed should stick once we're through the worst, and how will the reward and benefits landscape have shifted? What are the considerations people professionals need to consider from a legal, ethical, and commercial viewpoint when it comes to reward and benefits during and post COVID-19? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And our running order is as follows. First up, Charles will offer an overview of the importance of promoting good employee financial well-being and insight into how the coronavirus crisis could change how we operate reward management now and in the future. Then Sharon will give a case study about what her organisation has done around reward during this period. And then Laura is going to give us an overview of the legal implications of amending rewards and benefits packages in response to COVID-19. And after that, we'll take questions, which I'll remind you to please submit via the Q&A. So I'm going to hand over to Charles now. I have to remind Charles to take himself off mute. And if we could move to the start of Charles's slides, please. Charles, over to you.
Hello, everybody. So I think we're just moving on to my slides. Okay, I can't see them.
We move the slides along, please.
So if we go to the that one, yeah, that's great. So I'll start talking. So I think it's probably easier if I kind of start breaking down the reward elephant into its constituent parts. So I'm going to look at things such as base pay and variable pay and benefits. So when I look at base pay, I mean, one issue is how organisations set pay levels. For instance, do they How do they place a value on jobs, such as using the going rate for a job in the market, or some use a job evaluation scheme, others the cost of living, or the ability to pay, or a combination of all those factors. Now, coronavirus has resulted in calls for some frontline jobs, such as nurses, shop workers, delivery staff, to be valued and paid more highly. Now, one issue to consider is what impact that could possibly have on an employer's job evaluation scheme. Will there be a change in the factors used to value these jobs and how these are weighted? Will we start to see more employers using a job evaluation scheme to value their jobs? Another issue is whether these changes are going to come about because employers and HR departments are taking the lead, or because they're being forced to do so by external pressures, such as perhaps from customers, politicians, or the government. Obviously, I'd recommend HR to be in the front foot here. Among the lowest paid, what's going to be the impact of the increase in the national living wage to 66% of UK median earnings in the next few years? It's conceivable that median earnings could stagnate, so actually the national living wage won't have to increase by that much to hit that target. One problem is what's going to happen to the cost of living over the next few years. If it starts to go up, then how much people's pay packets can buy with that amount of money will fall. So you could actually see some people suffering a fall in their real earnings. At the other end of the spectrum, as was mentioned earlier by Katie, what's going to happen to CEO pay levels? Will the government start to intervene more, especially in those organisations where it has given money to help them deal with those organisations, deal with the current problems? We've already seen many firms and their CEOs reduce their pay or donate some of it because they want to be seen leading by example, or they know that it would go down badly if they didn't take a pay cut. And also, we're starting to see the gender pay gap has been, the gender pay gap has been suspended, but that isn't the case for the CEO pay reporting. So employers are going to need a strong narrative to explain their CEO and employee pay decisions to their investors and to the world at large. So when it comes to organising your wages into pay structures such as spot rates, broad bands, job families, I can't see any immediate changes, but there could be external pressures for firms that employ low-wage workers to try and create career progression paths for these employees. For many years, we've had this concept of horizontal pay structures. But where they have tended to be brought in, it tended to be brought in for professional and technical expert staff. So the interesting thing is whether we'll start to see more organisations start to consider horizontal pay structures as well. Regarding pay progression of employees through these grey structures, such as factors as length of service, employee performance, skills, market rates, etc. How will these need to adapt to the new business realities? For instance, performance-related pay progression. In many organisations, objectives have been set, measures defined, timetables specified in the pre-crisis environment. So what's going to happen? Will we see employers focusing more on rewarding employee behaviours than outcomes given what's happening? Will some employers amend their whole approach to performance management, such as staff having more regular discussions with their line managers or a greater focus on development? Some employers this year might not even bother with their performance-related pay approach, preferring to focus attention elsewhere and giving everyone the same pay increase. Though we are probably more likely to see pay decisions being deferred and some employers freezing or cutting wage rates. Though there are legal implications of doing so, and these may come up in the discussion that we're about to have. When it comes to variable pay, when it comes to things like bonuses and incentives, will we see a greater emphasis on variable part of total pay, or reduce emphasis with more focus on fixed pay? Will variable pay be linked to individual or collective measures of performance, such as share of profits or productivity gains? And how will performance be defined in the next few months? Will it be looking more at behaviours, employee behaviours and employee values rather than performance outcomes? Will we see more of a focus on the short term or perhaps more of a focus on the longer term? Among those employers where there has been an increased demand for their goods and services, some have responded by increasing their variable pay rates for such things as overtime, while others have given their employees a bonus to kind of recognise their contribution. I know in the US there have been some employees who have been asking for something called hazard pay, being paid more for putting themselves at risk. I think in the UK there's a more of an ethical issue around whether, as employers, we want to put our people in danger or let them take risks in the first place. And I think, more of an issue should be around risk management. If we could go to the next slide, which is looking at employee benefits. I think here there's a lot of issues, so I'm just going to raise, I suppose, a few of them. When it comes to financial benefits, there's a lot of issues around pensions. On the defined contribution front, some employers have cut the level of their pension contributions to staff on furlough, while others are now starting to think about cutting the contributions for those who aren't on furlough, their employees. Regarding defined benefit pensions, some companies are looking at rescheduling their deficit reduction programs. All organisations are being encouraged to communicate with their staff about what's going on to reassure pension savers to carry on contributing, and also to kind of highlight the increase in the number of pension scams that have taken off. Again, I think pensions again is a topic in its own right, so I better move on to other issues as well. When it comes to things like another area of financial well-being, those financial issues around well-being, but I would expect more of a focus on this in the coming months and see a growth in such initiatives as employee access to hardship loans, financial education programs and debt counselling. Things around health and well-being benefits. We saw a move at the start of the crisis as employers revised their approach to dealing with issues of self-isolation and occupational sick pay. Many employees have become very aware now of what their employer does or doesn't provide in terms of company sick pay and other well-being benefits. So I would expect these to become more of an issue when workers make decisions in the future to stay or change jobs. Paid leave. Some employers have had to change their policy regarding those who can't take leave and those who now must take it. Around the area of personal and family benefits, currently home working is more like business continuity than a perk of the job, though more professional staff can work from home than blue-collar workers. There is an issue of what's going to happen when the crisis is over, and will people expect more flexible ways of working? When it comes to social benefits, when it's safe to return, how will employers use social benefits such as a social event to reinforce a sense of community and achievement? Will people actually feel comfortable mingling at things as an office party? Transport. Some employers have been grappling about what to do with the company car and the associated tax issues. Some issues around how do you transport key workers to their place of work safely. We've seen an increase in the demand in the cycle to work scheme from employees, but how will organisations cope with the knock-on impact, such as demand for shower facilities? If people are going to be reluctant to use public transport in the short term, will they be looking more from their firms to provide a company car or access to car loans? And if they do, how will this stack up with the firm's corporate social responsibility credentials in tackling climate change? So if we could move to the next slide, you can see all these issues are going to impact on employee financial well-being and could cause financial stresses for workers. But what are the potential consequences of such stress? Research by the CIPD back in 2017 found that the impacts could include things such as Suffering from physical and mental fatigue due to lack of sleep, difficulty in concentrating and taking decisions at work, having to spend time dealing with money problems either at work or through absence, and poor health. So unsurprisingly, we found around 1 in 4 employees saying that they suffered from money worries, and it had a negative impact on their ability to do their job, which can then have implications for employee productivity, customer service, innovation, and ultimately the bottom line. It can also have an impact on how you are viewed by your external stakeholders, such as your customers and potential employees, as well as the media, politicians, and the public. So if we move to the next slide, how can organizations improve employee financial well-being? Well, employers have a role to play in improving employee financial well-being, but other people do as well, such as employees of the government financial services. But I'm going to focus on what employers can do. When we ask individuals what is important to their financial well-being, we find that paying them enough and paying them fairly is mentioned irrespective of age, gender, grade, etc. So employees are going to do nothing else, I'd focus, I'd suggest HR focusing on these two issues, paying people, especially key workers, a livable wage, which will have cost implications. However, if we can focus on improving employee productivity through job, work, and organizational redesign, then greater productivity can help pay for higher wages. Plus, paying people more money can help reduce recruitment costs through lower turnover. However, it doesn't matter how much more money you're going to pay if energy and housing costs are going to also increase. So that's where government has a key role to play. Similarly, if people don't believe they're being paid fairly, then again, it doesn't really matter how much you are giving them or how hard you are trying to improve productivity. It's not going to flow through if people aren't believing that they're being paid and rewarded fairly. So if we could go to the next slide. So preparing for the future, what we do now will impact on our future. At one level, all of us are looking at what we can do to help our employers cope with the next few months. At one end of the spectrum, it's simply about surviving, while at the other end, it's dealing with the stresses caused by unprecedented demand. We will need to make tough decisions about what's affordable and what's fair, but affordability and fairness aren't mutually exclusive, and fairness should underpin our thinking. But being fair also involves talking to our stakeholders for their views, as well as being empathetic to the plight that people will face because of our choices. At another level, just because a firm survived the economic crisis doesn't mean that it will thrive in the economic recovery. Whether it does so will depend in part on how well it has treated its workforce. It also depends on a recognition that the pre-crisis world has gone, and we're never going to be able to return to it, even if we wanted to. What we need to think about are new ways of doing business, as well as new ways of reward, managing and developing all our people, not just employees. So rather than bouncing back, we should be thinking about how we can bounce forward. To help your employer become future ready, HR needs to think about, well, what are the new business objectives, the culture, the mission, vision that the organization has, and are these now aligned to the reward philosophy, principles, strategy, policies, and practices? You also need to ensure that your reward approach is integrated with your other people management practices, such as talent management or performance development. And finally, I'd like to stress that we do have an influence, and collectively we can shape the future of the reward for better by working together. So I think that's my 15 minutes of fame at an end. And I'd like to pass on now to the next speaker, which I believe is Sharon.
Thank you very much for that overview, Charles. I'm going to hand over to Sharon, and Sharon's going to speak to us for 10 minutes or so about how they put some of this stuff into practice at NatWest Group. And just flag, we were having some audio issues, so let's just cross our fingers. And Sharon, if you could unmute yourself, and I'll hand over to you. Hopefully you'll be able to hear your words of wisdom.
Hi, Katie. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I'm not sure if you can see me. We're having some technical issues. I do have a camera, but it's not obviously not coming through. So I'll hopefully keep talking and everybody can hear me okay. I think it was really interesting just listening to Charles there. And if we think about what's commonly viewed as the different stages of what we're doing. So we tend, as many of the press keep talking about, to look at the respond, recover and thrive stages of what we're going through. So if I would say we're mainly still in the respond phase of that at the moment. So we are responding to immediate colleague needs in terms of the the proposition that we need to offer to them. But I think there's some really interesting discussions to come in the recover and thrive phases as well. So if I talk a little bit about how we've responded, first of all. So the first thing that we've done is looked at, I suppose, what are our different colleague needs at the moment? And we were really fortuitous in that we had just launched as an organisation, we just rebranded as NatWest Group at the start, in the middle of February, and we had launched a new purpose. And our purpose is that we champion potential, helping people, families and businesses thrive. And that has really set an excellent backdrop in terms of how we've responded for our colleagues, our suppliers, our customers, and the whole network that we support as a large organisation. In terms of looking specifically at colleagues, then we were considering the fact that a number of colleagues were suddenly placed in a very unusual situation. A number of them had lost their entire network of support, especially those who had any caring responsibilities, so not just those with children, but those with other caring responsibilities. They were having to reorganise their entire life. Some of them were still coming into the workplace. Some had been asked to work from home at very short notice. So the first thing that we did as an organisation was that we said that everyone's pay was protected for 6 months, regardless of the need to take time off for illness, dependence care, isolation or childcare. And that has proven to be a really powerful step and has probably done a couple of things. One, it's really reinforced that the purpose was something we were particularly serious about with all our colleagues, but it has also taken away a large amount of stress for a number of colleagues. And finally, it's given us great flexibility to allow colleagues to reorganise their work pattern in a way that suits them, but still means we as an organisation get the best we can out of them at this really difficult time. So that has been really well received by colleagues. And it's probably meant we've had to do less response to a number of smaller items along the way. The second need that we really wanted to focus on for colleagues was their need to feel protected from the risk of catching COVID-19. A number of our branches are still open. A number of our contact centre colleagues are still travelling to the office. So we have made sure in our branches that we are observing all the health and safety guidance, more to come as we've seen recently from the government, and we've put other protective measures in place. We have closed our mobile banks, which was quite a big thing actually. So having a small van move around lots of different locations in the current climate was not the best option for either ourselves or our customers. So we've stopped that. We've reduced some hours in our branches to try and allow colleagues to do more work over the phone with customers. And we are managing how customers work in our branches and how we work with them. We're also helping colleagues with any expenses that they occur travelling to work if their public transport is disrupted or they don't feel safe. So we're doing a lot to deal with that employee need. And then on the next one, I need more support for what I'm doing. So we are also doing, for those colleagues who do have to physically come into work, lunch on us, because even just something as simple as getting your lunch has been entirely disrupted by the current situation. And where we've needed to, we've, a little bit like Charles mentioned actually, we've extended our overtime to some other colleagues who wouldn't normally be eligible just because we're having to rely on them more, and also over some of our longer bank holiday weekends. So the COVID crisis has coincided with a number of bank holidays, one tomorrow for us as well. But we're conscious that our customers really need us at this point in time. They really need us to be progressing their requests as quickly as possible. So we're helping and supporting our business by doing some of that. In addition to that, we've launched some extra websites to tell, so colleagues can tell more of their stories about how they're helping customers. And all of this sits alongside a huge hub of information that we have available for colleagues, which focuses on a number of key topics, but one of the big ones is well-being during this process, during this current situation. So we are providing colleagues, we always had a huge well-being site for colleagues' well-being, something that we focused on for a number of years now, but we've reinforced that and helping colleagues around their mental health, around their physical security for colleagues who may be in a situation which isn't a great place for them to be, around their financial well-being, and just around the other elements of physical well-being. So allowing people to get some recycled office chairs delivered to their home, some additional IT equipment if they didn't have it available, and also a little bit more information about how to set up your desk. And if I'm very unlucky, my own broadcast, I'll get interrupted by my own recycled office chair being delivered to me today to help my back. So we're doing a lot around that piece, and we've extended some virtual GP services to colleagues, which we believe means that they can get some medical attention virtually and also take the pressure off the NHS as well, so they can access that service. In terms of the recover phase, where I think we will get into some of the broader questions around what does it mean for our year-end process, what will it mean for pay increases going forward, I would say for us, we're in a way too early to tell phase. We're very much still in that respond phase. I think as we hear more from the government over the next few weeks about easing of lockdown restrictions, we understand a little bit more what that's going to mean for our customers and our colleagues, then we'll give a little bit more focus on that stage. There is definitely other areas of the bank who are very focused on that recover phase, but not quite so much from a reward perspective. I think it'll be about another month or so. Obviously, we're having discussions with our remuneration committee, with our senior colleagues, but very much an early stage around what could that look like. I think as the organisation moves into thrive, and I really liked Charles's view on the bounce forward, because we aren't going to bounce back. Nothing I don't think will be the same again. Actually, we've started to think about what could this mean in the future. We've seen much more agile working across our organisation, and by that I mean that kind of agile methodology. We already had quite significant flexible working in our organisation, and we were more prepared for working from home than maybe some others. But I think we've seen more agility on how quickly we can move in as an organisation, how we can collaborate more effectively, and what does that really mean for how we reward people going forward. We're starting to see jobs being done from all over the place. You know, I live in a rural area, quite a distance away from where I normally work. You know, yeah, I'm being as productive as I would normally be in the workplace. So I think it will drive further flexibility on how and where people work and how and where we can have jobs located, which I think in itself will drive further questions about where we do see premiums in the market, which are solely down to location. And that'll be an interesting one to see as we go forward. I think also the point that Charles raised around roles where we typically assigned maybe a lower value to a role, will that still stay true? Have those been the roles we've relied on more during this period, and how do we want to reflect that a little bit more, looking at it more from a customer-centric point of view than a skills point of view? So I think it'll open up a number of questions going forward about how we want to look at our reward and structure our reward. I think there will be some more philosophical questions. So if you think as an organisation, we went through the financial crisis of 2008. We were significantly impacted, that as is well documented. And that did change a lot about us as an organisation. It changed, you know, where we were willing to place pay in our employee proposition, which is it's very much a part of rather than the key thing why you join us. We're very much fair payers, not top payers. And I think it could reshape how a number of organisations look at what's important to colleagues going forward and where does pay fit into that mix. So that just gives you hopefully a little bit of a flavour for how we're working through things in the organisation. But as I said, I think we're very much still in the respond phase at the moment.
Thank you so much for that, Sharon. And I can see your face. So that was a really great insight into what you're doing. And I think it chimed really well with what Charles has set up around the context. So before we get on to Q&A and just want to encourage you to put your questions into the Q&A box, I'm going to hand over to Laura. And Laura is going to give us a whistle-stop overview of the legal angle to all of this. Over to you, Laura.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Great. If we just go to the next slide, please. So just set out some of the things that we're going to cover today, some of the key issues on compensation and benefits. There's quite a lot to talk about, and so this will be a high-level canter through. So go to the next slide, that would be great. So just to set the scene, a key legal point. Where there is a contractual entitlement and you want to change it, generally you need consent. So specific flexibility clauses can work, but these are rarely on pay or benefits. Sometimes employment contracts have wording that the employer has the right to change any terms of the contract, but this kind of general unilateral change clause is generally not legally enforceable. So changes to elements specified in the contract, such as salary or the amount of holiday days or potentially the level of pension contributions will need consent. And if consent isn't obtained, there may be legal challenge. Where something's genuinely discretionary, then it is easier. For example, a truly discretionary bonus or a non-contractual policy benefit such as company maternity pay. However, there may be a challenge as to whether it really is discretionary, and I'll mention that briefly when talking about bonuses. Even if discretionary, an employer is still required to exercise their discretion in good faith and in a way which is neither arbitrary, capricious, nor irrational. And this is a fairly high bar, but is frequently used as a means of challenge. And a failure to exercise discretion in this way could be considered a breach of the implied duty of trust and confidence. I'll discuss today some of the legal options for changing reward and benefits. You have to remember that all options are subject to the company's internal governance as well. So you may need board approval, or if you have a REMCO, compensation issues will need to go there. Further, listed companies should follow guidance from bodies such as the Investment Association, and regulated companies such as banks will be subject to PRA and FCA governance. Next slide, please. So, I thought, what Sharon has been doing in the pay protection is absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, a lot of companies have had to look at reducing pay in this period. So reducing salary or contractual pay, this is one where you need consent. At this point, companies may have already made changes to pay. We've seen a lot of companies already having to do this. For some companies, timing was urgent and there wasn't time to get consent. If consent wasn't obtained, there could be legal implications. So an employee may bring a claim for breach of contract and or for unlawful deductions from wages. The time limit for a breach of contract claim is 6 years and unlawful deductions 3 months from the date of the last deduction. And this means that there isn't really a time when in a continuing employment situation you can say the time has passed for that claim was safe. From a legal position, an employer may have an implied consent argument. For example, if you get 6 months down the line and an employee hasn't raised their salary cut, you may be feeling in a safer position. I mean, practically, if the company didn't obtain consent at the time, that was likely for a good reason, and employees may not bring claims in the future, as ultimately they may still be pleased to have a job, and claims could threaten future financial stability and jobs at the company. Where consent was obtained, was that for a set period? For example, did you agree to a 3-month pay cut? And if so, what next? Are you looking to continue the pay cut? As this COVID situation continues, employees might be more reluctant to agree to a further change. Or you might now be looking to make a change to contractual pay. So if you're seeking to make changes, you have to consider what is the likelihood now of getting consent to the change. If you think that you might not get consent, is there anything you could offer in exchange? So anything to get that consent. Cash is often tight at the moment, but we have seen employers looking at options such as offering a new discretionary bonus. So if the individual or company does well in the next 12 months, that may mitigate any salary cut. Some companies are also considering offering share ownership in the company instead of cash. Where individuals don't consent to the change, what do? It's usually not a good idea to have some on new terms and others not. If you are considering the route of termination and offering employment on new terms, there will be potential legal issues, including unfair dismissal. And if more than 20 staff are potentially at risk of dismissal, there may be an argument that there are collective consultation obligations. I just wanted to mention here, you'll have seen a number of executives agreeing to forego pay or bonus and make a charity donation. From a legal position, these need to be properly structured with a contract variation, which is done before the employee is next entitled to receive their salary or bonus. If not, it's likely that they will still be taxed on their full earnings rather than being taxed on the reduced pay. Going to pay reviews, most companies have either deferred pay reviews or they have carried out pay reviews and frozen or deferred pay increases. Again, there could be contractual terms covering this. Most companies have in their contracts that they commit to an annual pay review, but state that there is no entitlement to a pay rise. However, there might not be such wording, and employees who have in previous years seen their pay increase steadily may argue an implied contractual right via custom and practice to a pay rise. Even if there is express wording to ensure discretion over pay increases, there may be that argument about whether discretion is being exercised properly and not arbitrarily, capriciously or perversely. For example, if someone has been promoted or given extra duties and in the organisation this has always previously come with a pay increase, is the employer acting fairly if there is now no pay increase? And if employers have deferred these reviews or increases, have they committed to when they are going to defer them to? If they haven't, or they've deferred them to when the company is in a better financial state, this could also create legal issues. Parity of treatment. At this time, we have seen some employees being frontline workers or classed as essential workers. Some are able to work from home. Some are on furlough. This kind of disparity in what people are doing can potentially create issues. So, for example, frontline workers versus those working from home. Most companies have decided not to pay additional compensation to frontline workers, but if additional compensation was being paid to frontline workers, could home workers have an indirect discrimination claim? For example, that women are more often having to work from home due to childcare or other caring responsibilities, and they are being impacted by not being eligible to get the extra comp. Could there also be equal pay issues? Charles mentioned job evaluation schemes. If jobs have been evaluated as the same but are now being compensated differently, there may be a challenge. There may also be challenges to job evaluations, i.e. that the extra risk and pressure means that the roles are no longer similar or certainly weren't for a certain period. I'll just move on because there's quite a lot to get through. Discretionary bonus. Companies have likely already taken the decision as to whether to pay out 2019 bonuses by now. By the end of March 2020, it was clear that many businesses were so impacted that there was little or no chance of achieving targets for annual bonuses. Where bonuses haven't been paid or have been reduced or deferred, these actions could lead to subsequent breach of contract claims. There may be arguments that the bonus scheme is not truly discretionary or that there was only partial discretion, and that would be the breach of contract claim. Even where the bonus scheme is discretionary, a lot of discretionary bonus schemes work on the basis that an employee is eligible to be considered for a bonus if they remain in employment at a certain date. Where the employer has subsequently decided not to consider their bonus or to consider them, but decide that the bonus is zero, then the employee may argue that their discretion has been exercised in an arbitrary, perverse, or capricious way. For example, an employee who has hit all their targets as per previous years, but now gets a zero bonus, might make that argument. Listed and regulated companies are potentially in an even more difficult position as they have external guidance they need to follow. For example, the Investment Association has been clear that where dividend payments are suspended or cancelled, a REMCO should consider how this is reflected in its approach to executive pay. They have also suggested that where bonus for 2019 has already been paid out, but dividends aren't being paid, that companies are expected to consider the use of malus or other discretions to reduce share awards related to 2019 bonus. From a legal position, attempting to use malice in a no-fault position could be very tricky. Looking at 2020 and beyond, companies may need to take a wait-and-see approach. They'll want to ensure that there is enough flexibility in the bonus scheme to allow discretions on future decision-making. And companies may consider changes to their bonus schemes. Again, I've mentioned instead of paying in cash, they may consider paying with share awards. Another way that we've seen some companies thinking about dealing with uncertainty in the future is to split annual bonuses into 2 6-month periods rather than the full year. On LTIPs and share award schemes, a lot of the implications legally are similar to those on discretionary bonus. Companies will need to be really clear as to what their rules allow them to do and whether there's enough flexibility in the rules for future planning, and if not, they likely want to amend their rules. Just thinking about the future and dealing with uncertainty, there's 2 options: whether companies wait to grant awards at all, but this can impact on performance periods, which are usually 3 years, or companies may consider granting now and confirming the performance targets later. Again, they're going to need to make sure there is enough flexibility in the rules for this. I'm going to miss out paying out LTIPs and performance adjustment provisions, but if anyone wants that to be covered, perhaps raise it as a question. Going to benefits. Various benefits, and again, as Sharon has mentioned, a lot of companies are doing more than what they previously did. Some legal points to think about. There are issues arising from the inconsistency from the government guidance on holiday pay. Holiday pay on furlough is to be paid at 100%, whereas employees who are working but have agreed to pay cuts will have holiday paid at the lesser amount. Again, that could lead to equal pay or discrimination issues depending on whether certain groups were more likely to be working or furloughed. A number of companies are also looking at their treatment of holiday entitlement, which is over the statutory minimum, so any holiday over the 28 days, and looking at whether they can agree to pay this at a lower amount or reduce it if the employee is on furlough, or even remove it entirely. Obviously, changes to contractual pay will need consent. Just to touch on company sick pay, where changes have been made up or down, have these been clear as whether they're temporary or permanent? Some employers will have allowed sick leave to be used for quarantine or childcare, and how long will these arrangements remain in place for? Could there be issues if they're removed? And where changes have been made to salary, you'll need to consider any impact on salary-related benefits, e.g. pension, life assurance, and critical illness. If pay has been reduced prior to an imminent PHI claim, this could have a significant impact and could lead to a claim from the employee. Generally with policies, at the moment, it's probably, if financially possible, best to take a wait and see and consider the long term for policies such as family leave, paternity and maternity. So just very quickly on what next. The 2008-2009 recession led to a significant increase in tribunal litigation. We're potentially going to see the same here. The financial crisis led to big changes around remuneration. Given the gravity of the impact of COVID-19, it is likely there will be an impact. Sharon mentioned agility and flexible working. I think this also applies to reward structures. It's going to be important to make sure there is sufficient flexibility in policies, contracts, plan rules, to ensure there's sufficient discretion for companies to take the steps they need in a crisis. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was a really great overview. Could we move on the next couple of slides, please, Mark? Thank you. So going to race through some questions. I'm going to group a few because we've got some that are quite similar. So quite a few people are asking, and you did touch on this, Laura, about people giving cash rewards to frontline workers. Is that something that people should be considering? Is it something that we know organisations are doing? And how might it impact people on furlough or office staff? Charles, have you got any insight on that? You need to unmute yourself. Charles, you need to unmute yourself.
Yep, unmuted hopefully now. Yes,
Yep.
Obviously I didn't press the my mouse forcefully enough. Yeah, I mean, a number of organisations have started to give their employees extra money because of the situation they find themselves in. So some organisations have increased the rate at which they get overtime, increased the number of employees being covered by overtime. Some organisations have kind of given recognition awards, saying, you know, we're going to give people £200, £300, £400 to recognise the situation that you are facing. Those organisations that are doing that are the ones that, at the moment, are facing unprecedented demand. So basically, all of the employees are kind of receiving that. I think the challenge would be in those organisations where there are some bits of the organisation doing well compared to other bits which aren't doing so well, and you're giving people in the bits that are doing well more money to kind of deal with the issues of them having to work harder. As was mentioned, there may be equal pay issues there, so you need to kind of consider those quite carefully. So again, you've got to kind of go back to first principles. You know, what are you trying to achieve as an organisation? What are you kind of giving this money for? How does it fit within in terms of your business? How does it fit within your business objectives? How does it fit with your kind of philosophy, your culture, your vision, your mission? Before you kind of start making these payments, think about what the implications could be before you do.
Thank you. And Sharon, if I could put that to you and add a question about any ideas for recognising frontline workers where you don't have any money to reward people with bonuses or pay, so any kind of nice ideas for non-financial recognition. You got any thoughts on that?
I think that will be a tricky one, won't it? I think the closest that we have at the moment is really publicising the colleagues' stories. So really trying to recognise the extra mile that colleagues are going for customers, how they're adapting to the current arrangements to really help our customers and publicising them so all colleagues can see that. So almost that individual recognition of bringing our purpose to life. So we're certainly doing some of that, which isn't, of course, entirely non-financial, because it is just about promoting that excellent focus on the customer. Otherwise, I think on the topic, I would agree with Charles's point. I think it's really important to understand what you would be recognising, who that would be, and what would be the longer term ramifications of taking a step like that. But I think if you're looking for entirely free recognition, then I think it has to be about promoting those really powerful stories for colleagues.
Thank you. And Laura, you mentioned that you're not aware that many organisations are choosing to pay what Charles referred to as hazard money earlier. Are you aware that is making that choice? Any particular sectors, or are most people just choosing not to do it?
Not particular sectors. Actually, there was a really helpful Aon survey, which is available to all, that came out today, and that did say, I think 76% of companies have chosen not to make those kind of payments. So yeah, and I think anecdotally, some people have said, well, the NHS workers are not getting more money, so kind of why would our frontline workers be?
Yeah, I've heard that actually, that exact phrase used in conversations with HR directors as well. Sharon, specific question for you. Have you determined what Thrive will look like, kind of next stage, and what that will mean for pay and reward? Or is it still very much a work in progress?
So I would say it's very much a work in progress. The Respond has taken a fairly huge collective effort across ourselves and our policy and wellbeing teams. I think we are very much now focused on, first of all, recover. So what happens when we get colleagues back to work, which is less on the reward side and more on the health and safety side, and who should even come back into work. So I think in terms of priority from a reward perspective, the Recover and Thrive are certainly hot topics within my own team, but nothing that we are committing to longer term at the moment for colleagues. We have had a few conversations with market data suppliers, because obviously there's quite a lag. Most of us are putting our data in at the moment, which will reflect what's just happened in year-end cycles rather than what we're facing into just now. So how can market data suppliers be a little bit more nimble around really giving us some good insights, and what different approaches could they take to really help us, and posing some of those questions for the future to them at the moment, just to try and get a bit of a broader dialogue going on those topics. So a hot topic in my own team, but nothing that we've shared any recommendations with any further at the moment.
Thank you. Charles, we've got a question about financial wellbeing being a hot topic in terms of finding good providers who can provide impartial advice. I don't think we can provide a list of providers, but do you have any advice on perhaps how to go about finding a good provider and what kind of stuff you should be looking for?
Well, again, I think it's going back to first principles. What are you trying to achieve as an organisation through employee financial well-being? And then when you are looking at suppliers to see, well, how do they kind of fit that? Are they going to provide what you need? And how do they fit with your philosophy, your ethos, your culture? I mean, all financial education providers are coming at it from a different perspective. They've got different kind of values. They've got different types of products. So it's go through your due diligence process and kind of work out, well, which ones are the best fit for us, and then kind of meet them well, obviously you can't meet them in person now, but kind of meet them virtually and kind of get a sense of what they're trying to achieve and how they fit within your organisation.
Thank you. One for you, Laura. What are your thoughts on how many cases might be stacking up for employment tribunals? Are they coping, or do you think they'll be able to cope with all the potential claims as a result of the current situation? Do you think there'll be a lot of claims to come through?
So there's obviously all the cases in the system which aren't moving on as quickly as they usually would do. So that's going to increase the bottleneck. I mean, as I mentioned, my experience from 2008 was that there was a significant increase in tribunal claims, you know, particularly from people who lost their job and weren't able to find another one. So I would expect there to, you know, for us to see in 2020 an increase in the number of claims. And I think that will inevitably lead to a delay in these claims getting processed.
And do you envisage that there'll be, so somebody's asked a question about their executives took a reduced pay cut that happened last year. Pay cut's been deferred with no defined date to make payment, and the execs are happy with the instruction and happy with the arrangement and instructed the change. It was not done by contract variation. What kind of risks are there? And that's a very specific question. Obviously, don't expect you to give any specific advice. But I guess if there are quite a lot of organisations that I'm anecdotally aware of that maybe did not get as strong consent as they might have done if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, I think some comfort can be taken that where executives have been involved in the decision making around that, or, you know, have not raised issues to date, that I think that practically reduces the risk of a challenge down the line.
Yeah. Charles or Sharon, have you got any thoughts on performance target changes? Because outlooks are very different now, and current targets might not be realistic if you're doing performance-related pay.
Well, at the current ones, I'm just not sure how much you can actually use things like performance targets, given how things have changed so much. So perhaps organisations will be more focused on behaviours. I suppose if you look back at what happened in 2008, there seemed to be some organisations who were kind of compensating their chief executives for a fall in pay through the potential to earn bigger bonuses if they increased their share price by a certain amount. And of course, back in 2008, 2009, share prices were quite low. So it was relatively easy for many of these executives to eventually kind of hit those targets, which inflated executive remuneration. It's something we've been having to deal with the high levels ever since. So hopefully this time there'll be, when the Remuneration Committee is thinking about executive pay targets, they think, well, to what extent will the low figures that the share prices at the moment, you know, will this kind of help the executive hit their target, and shall we therefore be having more kind of thought and consideration about how we structure those long-term incentive plans in the future?
And I'll just do one final one because we did start a little bit late. And Sharon, have you got any thoughts on annual leave has come up a lot in the conversations I've been having, and obviously a concern that people might be stacking up a lot of days because they're not using, because they can't go anywhere right now. Do you think you'll expect to see people cashing them in, or will you be helping people carry more over?
So certainly for us, we're focused on helping people carry more over a longer period of time. We also allow colleagues to buy a small number of holidays through our flexible benefits programme. So we've confirmed for people who've bought those that they can also form part of that carryover into the end of 2022, when we would expect to move back to our normal carryover approach. We're trying to focus on that, and also encouraging people to take at least half of their entitlement before the end of September. And we're doing that very much through the wellbeing lens. It's very easy at the moment to say there's nowhere to go, but actually it's still so important to have time out. So our preference is to try and find a good way to encourage colleagues to use their holidays, even if they don't use maybe quite as much as they might have expected this year, rather than to enter into any discussions on cashing out. And I think we do need to be aware of that as responsible employers, because as Charles mentioned at the beginning, the second thing that people are starting to worry about is, you know, Zoom meeting fatigues. How are people, you know, with lots of people working different working patterns, or some people's days stretching out even longer. So we've got a big focus just now on, you know, constantly reminding people that it's still important to take some time out, even if that's just to get a rest from the day job, and there's, you know, maybe focus on some of those chores at home at the moment. But yeah, we're definitely more in that space around encouraging colleagues to take time.
Thank you. I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap up there because it's all we've got time for this afternoon. I'd like to say thank you very much to our really fantastic panel for giving up your time and your insights. As I said earlier, this webinar will be available on demand from this afternoon. You are free to share it with peers and colleagues, and the slides will also be available to download. A reminder that our webinars next week are on return to work. I think that will be the first of many, and a special leadership conversation between Peter Cheese and Government CPO Rupert McNeill. You can sign up for those now. They're open via the CIPD website. And a final reminder, this slide you can see now is about our new wellbeing support for members in the UK and Ireland. As Sharon said, we might not be able to go anywhere right now, but we really should be looking after ourselves. So we're really pleased to be able to offer members a free 24/7 telephone helpline staffed by therapists and provided by Health Assured. So that's it from us today. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the long bank holiday weekend if you're watching this live, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.